Going live. Okay, we should be live. Awesome. Great. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first ever Logic Apps Live webcast. We're really excited to be doing this. This is the first time we've been doing it, so we hope that you stay engaged, you let us know how it goes, and hopefully we'll be doing more of these. We will be doing one next month and the month after, and we're really excited. To get started, let me just introduce myself. I'm Jeff Holland. I'm a program manager here in Azure for Logic Apps, and I'm joined today by Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lamb. I'm a principal program manager on Logic Apps, and I'm excited to share some stuff later on at the end of the broadcast on what we're doing in the future.
That's right, some cool stuff that we've both released and stuff that's coming up. So to get started, I just kind of wanted to spend a minute or two to go over why we've started doing these broadcasts and what we're hoping to get out of these. We know as we build this product that some of the most valuable stuff that happens comes from the community. It comes from all of you, and we want to be engaged with you. We want to help, answer your questions, make sure that we're enabling this product to make all of your lives better and empower you to do some pretty cool things. And there's a lot of ways that we do that. You'll see we're really involved in Twitter, we're on the forums, we're going to events and conventions and whatnot. And this is just another way for us to open up and share, hey, here's some of the things that are top of mind. Here's some of the things we're working on that we've just released. Give us a chance to answer some of your questions. You'll actually notice if you look at the video description below, there's a link to our Twitter account at LogicAppsIO, as well as an email address. You can send us questions, comments, whatever, and we hope you do. And honestly, we'd love to see, there's already been some great blog posts, some GitHub commits of some really cool stuff to work with Logic Apps, and that's awesome. And we hope to continue to see that, see involvement from community in the forums, because with a new product, there's new users coming in all of the time. And as these new users start, it's such a great experience if they can come in, see that there's this community, here's what other people have done, here's some of the ways that they've solved some of this, the challenges that they're facing. And so we hope to see that happen, and we'll do what we can to make it so that does. So one of the things we want to do with this is kind of give some pointers or tips and tricks at the beginning. And in the future, if there's a cool thing that you've done or a blog post that you can share with us, we'd be more than happy to highlight that or to even invite you on to broadcast with us. But since this is our first one and it's a little bit of a blank slate, I got to choose the pointer I wanted to do. And I honestly, Kevin and I talked about this for a bit. I've talked to a few other people on the team of what should we share that's interesting and powerful, and it will help people do some cool things with Logic Apps, but isn't overly complex. So I've actually kind of done a little bit of a compromise. And last night, I actually wrote a blog post that I went into detail about this feature I'm about to show for a few minutes. You'll actually see a link to our blog in the video description. So if at any point during this, you're like, hey, how did he do that? Or how could I set this up myself? Check out that blog post, leave some comments. That'll go into some more detail. But yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and get started with this cool feature, which is how you can call a Logic app from another Logic app. So how you could chain Logic apps together. And if you're watching this and you're not super familiar with Logic apps, Logic app is a feature in Azure App Service that lets you chain together a series of different services or APIs to execute some task, right? So you could have a trigger, whenever I add something to my SQL database, I want you to call this service, leverage this database, do these things to chain together some great events. You can use conditions, some cool stuff. So specifically today with calling between different logic apps, the scenario I was kind of thinking about was I was actually inspired yesterday while I was driving to work, and I was listening to a podcast, and he was talking about how whenever you have any kind of a product or an app or a website, one of the most important things you can do is keep track of your users, keep track of your customers, keep track of the people who are interested in what you're doing, because you never know, it comes in handy as you continue to build new things or you need feedback. And I was thinking about how all of us are working across all these different services. Maybe we have different apps or websites. And let's say for this example, we want to combine all of the contact information we have across all of these different services and put them into a single list, like a master list of all my contacts. So we're going to do that with Logic Apps, and we're going to chain some Logic Apps together to make it happen. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
So this is one way of showing the modularity of Logic Apps. You can have different Logic Apps defined, stored, and then referenced in your other Logic Apps.
Yeah, exactly right. And there's a few ways that you can do this as well. We're gonna go through the nuts and bolts way right now, but you'll notice even if you look at that blog post linked below, we link to some other ways you can do that. So you should be able to see this now. This is a really simple logic app that I'll just walk through quickly. And what this logic app is doing is you'll see I've got a beginning. I have two actions. These are both just using the Microsoft SQL connector that comes with logic apps. And what this first action does is it's going to do a select to see if I already have a customer with this email address that I'm going to pass in. And I know if I already have a customer with this email address, for this purpose, I'm going to say they're already in the database. I don't want to duplicate the entry. So in the second step, it's going to receive the output of this first step. And I have a condition here. You notice it says, if this is empty, so if my first step was empty, then go ahead and insert the customer in. But what's nice about this is if I do this first step and I return a user, which means it's already in the database, Logic Apps is automatically going to skip this second step. I'm not going to get duplicate data. And if you've used Logic Apps before, one of the interesting things you'll notice about this Logic App is I don't have a trigger set up, right? This isn't executing either through recurrence or through a service. This is set to manually run, but you'll notice in my app, I'm actually referencing trigger output. And you might be wondering, well, how is that even working? Where are you getting the trigger output from? And the reason is because I plan to use this specific Logic App, which I'm going to call my add contact Logic App. I'm planning to use that through a HTTP post. And I know when I post to trigger this Logic App, if I use the management API, which is linked to in the blog post, that I can pass through what those trigger outputs are. So I can do this myself. So here's the simple Logic App. We're actually going to switch to Postman to just show you what a post would look like. And again, you could use Fiddler, you could use curl, whatever. Oh, but before I do actually, so the two things that you need for this to work, to be able to execute this is you need to know what is your Logic App endpoint and what is the access key, because you need to show that you're authorized to do this. And luckily, both those things are really accessible to you just in the settings of your Logic App. If you come in here to properties, I'm actually going to need to change this after this broadcast because a bunch of people are going to have an authorization. You'll see here's my endpoint, which is just an HTTP endpoint. And here's an access key, which I'm going to use to generate my basic authentication token. How you do this is when you use one of these access keys, the username is default because you're using a default one. You could generate your own, but you go ahead and I'll show you what this looks like a little bit. So once I have those two things, you'll see I'm just posting here on Postman. I'm posting to that endpoint, and I've actually appended the URL with this API call right here, which is documented. So if I say /run, and then I pass it through a parameter, which is the API version, which for right now is this date, that's going to go ahead and trigger. And I'm going to pass it two headers. The first one's just saying, hey, I'm going to be sending you some JSON data, which is going to have the contact information. And the second one is the authorization I mentioned before. So how I generated this was I base64 encoded the username default against that key that I pulled from Logic Apps. And if you're hearing that and you're like, well, what is this? Check out the blog post. I linked to where you can do it. Postman and Fiddler actually both have tools to do this automatically, but I want you to see this and it will help us as we trigger it from other ones. And then here's the body. Really simple. All I'm going to pass through is a name, an email address, a phone number, and a Twitter handle to my Logic App. So you'll see right now when I send this, I went ahead and I got a 202 accepted response from Logic Apps, which is an asynchronous response. It's saying, hey, this isn't necessarily completed executing yet, but I've got your content, I've got your authorization, it looks good. I've started this Logic App with the stuff that you did. And I could use asynchronous callback to figure out when this app finishes and get the status. Or I can actually just come back in here, and if you look at my operations log, let's see if this loads, you'll notice that 11:08, which is right now, this did trigger. It went through both steps and it succeeded. And you'll actually notice here, if you look at the inputs for the second step, that it's taken as parameters for the second step, those values that I passed in. So that's awesome. Now I could do this, and you actually notice if I sent this again, it will accept again. And if we were to look at that operation log, you'll see that it's actually going to skip the second step because it's going to do that first check and say, hey, I already have this email address. So that's awesome. I now have half of a Logic App that I can pass data to. But in order to make this really valuable to us, we need to call it from something else. And at this point, I want to call it from another Logic App. So I'm just going to switch tabs here. This is a second Logic App I have. In the blog post, I actually use a scenario where whenever anyone posts on my Facebook page, I want you to grab their Facebook information and store that in this database. So send that to the second Logic App. For this demo, though, I've decided to shake it up a little bit. And this is going to be a Twitter one. And this is, if you see, a trigger now. And the trigger saying, whenever anyone mentions me in a tweet, which is Logic Apps IO, I want you to go ahead and start this Logic App. and all it's doing for the second step is an HTTP, man, that word is so hard, HTTP post. All it's doing is a post, right? And this is the exact same post that we just did in Postman. You'll see I have the same URL, the same headers, my content type, and my authorization. I'm actually going to switch to code view because it's a little easier to see the content in that view. But you'll notice if we get to code view, some of these windows timed out because I waited so long to do this. But you'll notice if I see, let's come in here again. There we go. That's what happens when you open things. Well, it's not doing it now, but you'll notice it's easy enough to tell that this body is the exact same body that I had in Postman, right? I just copied and pasted it in as the body. But instead of passing in a hard-coded value, what I'm actually doing through logic apps is I'm referencing the trigger output. So I'm saying, hey, instead of just passing in a name that I want you to actually pass in who it was tweeted by and their Twitter ID as the name, the contact information, and the Twitter handler. So this has actually been running. So you'll notice we might even be able to tell if we check out this operation log. Whenever anyone tweets Logic Apps IO, it triggers the second logic app, which then pushes the information, stores it in a SQL database. So in theory, I could have a bunch of these now, right? I could set up a logic app that whenever I had a customer into Salesforce, send that customer info to this master SQL list, right? Or whenever maybe I have an on-premise SQL database or an Oracle database, whatever, we could do logic apps for all of those things to keep this live, up-to-date context list, which is really valuable. So now I have a SQL table that has all of my customers across all of my different services. So that's what I wanted to show you. There's some cool things here I didn't even get to detail with. When this logic app executes, it actually has a synchronous callback built in. So this logic app will know if this call succeeded or failed, and I could take outputs from it and chain a few different logic apps together. It's a really powerful tool. And again, if you have questions, feel free to tweet questions. I'll be answering questions, and check out that blog post. So that's it. Let me go ahead and switch.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool. It really is. It's a cool little scenario. So actually, before I even turn back on the camera, I might as well just, Kevin, if you just want to jump into your stuff.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So here is, oh, look at this. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so I just wanted to take the last few minutes to talk about some of the things that we're working on. But before I talk about the things we're working on, I wanted to share with you what's the latest and greatest things that we've actually just put out there. The first thing we've done is added a start time with a time zone. So now you can have on your recurrence action, you can specify a start time when that logic app should actually run at. So you can now write a logic app and say, hey, run at midnight on Friday. It'll actually start running at midnight. With time zone, we also support daylight savings. We've added one new function called parse, which will take a string and create an object out of it or an array. And then we've enhanced strings so that you can actually take the object or array and stringify it. This is going to be really helpful. So when you have different outputs and inputs to your different actions, now you have the flexibility to go ahead and treat strings as objects or objects as strings and pass those in and out of your API apps. You can now rename logic apps. There's a capability that's built into the Azure Resource Manager that will allow you to rename resources. Logic app is a resource, and now we have added support for renaming logic apps. Move logic apps across resource groups. So, if you started developing your logic apps and realized that you wanted to reorganize how your logic apps wanted to coexist or be in a separate resource group, you can now go ahead and do that through the ARM APIs. So we're constantly making UI improvements and fixes. So the designers is constantly being tweaked. There's two that I'll highlight. There's actually more that we fixed in the last week. But help tips for why you can't delete actions. So we're making it a little easier for you to understand why delete doesn't work. And you have scenarios where you have dependencies or other things that would prevent you from deleting an action. And also removing duplicate authorization buttons. If you authorize once for a particular action, don't ask me again. And so we've gone ahead and fixed that. So now I want to get into what's in our backlog. So what are the things that we're actually working on now? We actually have quite a big backlog, but the things that are kind of most active on our plate. So we've come out in our preview with a designer, and we realize that there are some shortcomings in the design, and we are in the progress of updating that Logic Apps designer so that it can encapsulate a lot of the capabilities that you need for workflow type of definitions. Look for that coming up in a few months. That will be a long running process, so don't expect that out in the next week. Filtering gallery items in the designer. So in the current designer, you have a bunch of Logic apps on, API apps on the right-hand side. We're making it easier for you, so you can just start typing in the API app name, and it'll filter it down to the one that you care about and want to add into the definition. Triggers inputs and Logic app outputs. So in today, you get to see all the inputs and outputs for each action. But one of the things you don't get to see is the actual trigger input for the Logic app instance and the output of your Logic app itself. So you can define a Logic app to actually have outputs, and we don't have a way to show that to you in the designer. Although you can also always see it in the API, it just wasn't available in the designer. So that's going to be coming soon. Move Logic apps across subscriptions. So I talked about how we enabled moving Logic apps across resource groups. The next thing that's coming is being able to move your Logic app across subscriptions. And the big one.
Oh, this is good.
Yeah, this is the hot one. Everybody wants this one. Do until. So do until solves a lot of the polling scenarios that people have for interacting with their API apps. What I've done here is I've added a little snippet example. So on any action, you can see that you have the until part of the JSON definition. You can add that until clause to any action that you have in your Logic app definition. So what you can do then is supply a condition, and that condition will tell the Logic apps engine how long should I run this for. So until this expression is true, continue running this action. We also provide some constraints with the limit. In this case, I provided 2 limits just so you could see it. You can have both the timeout and a count. So the timeout is an ISO format to say, hey, in this case, only run this for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, complete, and then you'll get an error saying that it timed out, or only run it 5 times. I don't want you to try this 5 times. So in this case, I'm saying only until there's 5 items in the array in the response that I get back from the action, or I've tried this 5 times, or for 5 minutes. Keep trying this request. So this enables a lot of the polling scenarios. So if I want to, for example, poll an HTTP endpoint until I get a 200 status and a message that has a request complete or content ready, you can go ahead and start designing those. And that can be on any action, not just the HTTP action.
Yeah, I remember there was a question when we got this week around, if I'm calling some third-party service and it's not very reliable, right? And I know that 1 out of 10 times it's just going to reject the HTTP, right? This would totally solve that, where you could say, hey, try it again until it's good, and you
get the answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, which is awesome.
So we're very excited about this one. This will solve a lot of these open scenarios that we have for polling.
Cool.
That's it.
Very cool. Thank you, Kevin. So let me go ahead and switch back to the camera so you can see our beautiful faces again. We should still be broadcasting. Awesome. So that's it. Honestly, it's just a quick little stand-up update just like that. We'll be online over the next few days. So some of you, we've got a few live viewers, which is awesome. I'm not going to say we love you more than the viewers who are watching this recorded, but I'll just hint to it. But go ahead and send us your questions, your tweets. I'm going to be on Twitter for the rest of the day. So if you're watching the recording, let us know, especially too on, we walked through chaining Logic apps together, calling a Logic app from another one. If there's features that you're interested in knowing about, right? Maybe you want us to go into detail on, well, how do I integrate my own custom APIs into this? Or how do these BizTalk connectors work? Or can you walk me through setting up some of the on-premise connectors?
How does that repeat thing work?
Yeah, exactly. Repeat, that's a good one, right? And if you want to know, let us know, and that's what we're covering. Or if there's something that you've done, you're like, hey, I've rigged up my, desk so that whenever I do a Logic app, this or that happens. Someone was just tweeting last night about how they have Logic apps working with all their Raspberry Pis and stuff. So let us know those things too, because we'll use this as a forum to share what you've done with everyone else. So, and to make it enticing too, I don't have it. It's off screen. We do have a few t-shirts, some Azure swag t-shirts and stickers. So we'll be selecting a few people who tweet us and email us and send us comments or whatever. And we'll send you some cool stuff so that you can let people know that you're all about the Logic app. So that's it for now, though. Thanks so much for joining. We will be doing one of these next month. So make sure you follow us on Twitter so you can stay up to date on when that's happening. It'll be sometime in July, and we'll do a similar format. We'll have some updates and talk about what's hot. So that's it.
Excellent.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining.
Cheers.